Ever wondered how peak professionals become so creative, productive, and energized? My name is Gaurav Rastogi, and I'm on a mission to explore what's possible when the mind, attention, and energy flow together. On Zero Point Done, a series of conversations with peak professionals, I want to ask them their systems. Less than 0.1% of all the people are ever able to apply all the common knowledge into their lives to achieve uncommon results. Our first guest is Yashish Dahiya. Yashish is a unicorn founder, the chairman of Policybazaar, and an Ironman triathlete. Now, Yashish is always filled with optimism and energy, and I'd like to ask him how he does it. How he plays the long game, whether it's participating in an Ironman, which is 3.86 kilometers of swimming, followed by 180 kilometers of bicycling, followed by 42 kilometers of running. And not just that long game. He founded his startup in 2008 and they went public in 2021. This is a really long cycle, and I'd like to ask him how he maintains his energy and enthusiasm for his projects. When we meet, I'm also going to ask him about patience, risk, and freedom. Join us on Zero Point Done with Gaurav Rastogi. Hello and welcome to Zero Point Done with me, Gaurav Rastogi, and my guest today is Yashish Dahiya of Policybazaar. Let me set up the introduction. We're starting Zero Point Done because Warren Buffett said, "Tell me who your heroes are, and I'll tell you how you will turn out to be." We want to be excellent. Excellence gives us satisfaction. It's a source of identity and a sense of meaning and purpose that makes life worthwhile. And so we look up to excellence. We're fascinated with excellent people. We want to hear their stories. We like to imagine ourselves as them. And so we can capture a little bit of their magic with us. Now, peak professionals have always been a source of inspiration. They seem to come out of the ordinary and become extraordinary. You might have heard names that are unreachable, either because they're long gone or they're too famous and too far away. Look at Albert Schweitzer or Albert Einstein or Rabindranath Tagore or Ben Franklin or Chanakya, Lao Tzu. Who are these people? What was going on in their lives? And we believe that excellence is contagious. We become like the people we admire. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, "Yad yad acharati shrestha tattad devetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate," which is to say, how excellent people behave, others will emulate. And so people pursue the standards set by excellent people. And that's our project in Zero Point Done. I'm really trying to answer these questions for myself, and I figured I may as well ask these publicly so we can actually have you listen into the same conversations as well. Now, let me introduce you to my friend Yashish Dahiya. Yashish is the chairman and founder of Policybazaar, which is a leading digital insurance provider with about $1.3 billion of sales, of premium sales, and over 1 million customers per month. Yashish is a Bachelor of Engineering from IIT Delhi and my classmate at the MBA program at IIM Ahmedabad, as well as an MBA from INSEAD. Now, Yashish also likes to spend time outdoors, and he's the current master national champion in swimming. He is the fifth fastest Ironman from India across all ages. And I've known Yashish for over 3 decades, way before he was a unicorn founder or India's Ironman athlete. And even at that time, this is 30 years ago, Yashish has always been a large-hearted, forever smiling guy who made friends easily and thought nothing. And this used to be legend, but he confirmed later, who thought nothing of skipping the bus from IIT Delhi going all the way home, 20 kilometers away, and running because he felt it was faster that way. And so Yashish has always been a legend in our friend circle, and I'm so glad that he's here and we can ask him questions. So Yashish, welcome to Zero Point Done, and tell us a little bit about Policybazaar, what it is, and how you got to start it.
So Policy Bazaar, I'll start by what is the alternative to Policy Bazaar. The alternative to Policy Bazaar is there are 2-3 million agents in India who sell insurance. There is a particular effort required in selling insurance because you have to go to somebody's house and knock on their door, etc., etc. And it typically costs about 5 to 10,000 rupees to sell a health or life insurance policies. And the customers are largely disengaged and disenchanted with the whole process. So when I looked at this, I found that the customers were not buying what was really good for them, which was protection, health insurance, life insurance. And in the Indian context, for many of the people who lived in India and grown up in India, the middle class doesn't have any social security. And especially as they become nuclear families, it becomes even harder. So I thought it was very critical to educate the middle class in India about the need for protection against death, disease, and disability from a financial perspective. And that's why Policy Bazaar spent the last 15 years being the largest advertiser in the country for health insurance and life insurance. And today, we are the Google of insurance in India. Almost 95% of online searches come on Policy Bazaar for insurance. And about 60% of all transactions in India in the online insurance place happen on Policy Bazaar. We are still only about 4 to 5% of the Indian total market, online and offline. But clearly, the fastest growing part, Rusty, I must correct you, we are at about $2 billion now.
Two
And
now. All right.
yeah, growing still at about 50-60% every year. So hopefully next year I'll tell you we are at 3 billion. But yeah, that's what it is.
That's impressive. Now, for those of us who may not follow Ironman, could you tell us a little bit about what Ironman is, how that works?
Sure. Ironman is a race which is about 4 kilometers of swimming and then about 180 kilometers of cycling, followed by a 42-kilometer run. And in the middle, you transition from one to the other. You start in the morning about 6 to 7 o'clock, and different Ironman start at different times, some at 6 o'clock, some at 7 o'clock. And you have to finish before midnight. Many say it is the toughest one day endurance sport. Uh, I started my triathlon journey about 2016 because I loved all three sports. I loved swimming, cycling, and running. And it's a great experience to do it. A lot of people across the world do it. It wasn't very popular in India at that time. It's increasingly gaining popularity in India as well.
That's exciting to hear the running and swimming and cycling. Thank you for that, Yashish. You talked a lot about freedom, and I remember reading that you felt freedom when you were running. How does freedom play into your life? What is this idea of freedom to you? What does it mean?
See, what is freedom? It's a very important thing. What is freedom? Freedom is your ability to do what you want to do. It's your ability to live, breathe as you wish. And I think that's what it is. And in everything that we speak about, Gaurav, whether it was not taking the bus but running instead or cycling instead, you will find in all of those the iota of freedom that one is looking for. So I think even when I was at IIM, I did want to become an entrepreneur, although I never had the courage to do so because a salary was required to support the monthly running. Whether I did the job, ITW, did not quite enjoy doing only what my boss asked me to do. I would rather do what I felt like doing. And so I don't know how to define it. It's almost being defined in a bad way, that inability to stick to confined spaces, confined orders, confined norms, where you feel you are no longer in power of the decision making. And I think I'll give you a very simple example, right? Like, my wife does a job in a bank, and I obviously do my job, which is running my company. And I think mine is a lot more remunerative. Uh, I say that with respect for my wife, because there were times when her job supported us in being able to continue. But I have a lot more freedom than she does. And she earns a very basic salary, but she doesn't have freedom to take 2 days off. So suppose we're going on a family holiday, it's almost always she who's not having the time. But at the same time, there would be times when I would be working 18, 20 hours in a day. There's no problem. There's a lot of stresses. But I like that because I can do it at my own pace and I can have a lot of flexibility. I used to, my wife went to INSEAD for a year. And so both the children stayed with me at that time. I would drop them to school. I would pick them from school. I would bring them to my office. They would sleep in the sofa in my office. I always liked that whole freedom thing, because I think this compartmentalizing of work and family and exercise happens because people don't have freedom. Nobody will allow you, in general, in most offices, to just go for a run in the middle of the day, or go pick up your kids in the middle of the day and spend time with them, but then be available at the middle of the night also for work, right? I think that fungibility, I don't know if I'm defining it correctly, but that flexibility to do what you wish and what you think is right at that moment is very precious to me. And running definitely gives me that, because you're on your own, you're fully in control. You can feel you just feel very alive and very free when you're running. So that's why I enjoy doing it and I keep doing it.
Yeah, I remember coming to see you in London. This is over a decade ago, and even at that time, you had bicycled into the meeting.
I
You've always
enjoy,
been.
see, I think quite practical in that in London, the tube costs you £200. It's quite dingy, £200 a month. It's quite dingy. You have to go down, go up. It's okay. I think a bike, you buy one bike. I think I had bought mine that time for about £50, second-hand bike. And that's it. Maybe I spend 30, £40 on its servicing. I have to exercise anyway in the day. I get some exercise, I cycle, I enjoy. I think then I got a better bike, maybe £200 bike. But on the whole, imagine the amount of money I saved, the amount of exercise I got, the amount of freedom I got left whenever and I almost always got to my office faster than the tube. That's the reality of biking. Now, the challenge is when you come back, you got to be able to shower, etc. And I figured out that in the UK, most big offices have a shower. And you don't sweat that much. Sometimes you can just cycle a little slowly. So it's a fun thing to do. And to me, that just makes, I know it may sound odd, but the point is, to me, that just sounds very natural thing to do. It is not like I'm doing it out of some greatness or any big thing.
You went very successfully IPO'd a couple of years ago. Did money buy you more freedom than what you already had?
See, I'll share with you what I have learned about money. Money gives you the ability to become more of who you actually are. simply because till you don't have money, society and societal pressures matter a lot.
Hmm.
But once you have a lot of money, you actually don't need to care about societal pressures in any way because you're sorted, right? You're sorted for yourself, you're sorted for your kids, at least from a living perspective. So, what I have noticed is nice people become nicer, uh, and people who were by nature idiots become more of idiots, more arrogant, more whatever. That's the reality. That's all that money does. So it allows you to be yourself. So in that context, I agree with you. It definitely gives you more freedom.
Interesting. Let's move on to another thing that caught my attention. You've run long races in more ways than one, and you've always said that patience is something is your strong suit. When did you realize patience is your strong suit?
It was actually, it came as a negative realization the first time. About 2, 3 years into Policy Bazaar, if for those who do not know, Policy Bazaar from a family perspective was a strange compromise because my family used to live in the UK and Policy Bazaar was in India. And in typical style, without thinking, I had moved and started up Policy Bazaar without thinking about what the end state of this would be. Whether my family would move to India or whether I would live in the UK or whether we would continue to live separately for forever or whether Policy Bazaar would finish in 2, 3 years and I would come back. I hadn't thought of all of this. I had just started. And me and InfoEdge were having some conversations about because Sanjeev used to ask me all the time that what's your end state? And I didn't have an end state. And it used Sanjeev is InfoEdge chairman, and it used to get very complicated because I didn't have an end state. So I used to tell him, okay, I'll figure out an end state in a couple of years. And what that meant to him was that I would leave Policy Bazaar in a couple of years. And he had invested with us, so that used to really rile him up, and our relationship was getting affected. So I went to Deep Kalra, who's a friend of both Sanjeev and mine, and I explained this whole story to him. And when he heard it, he says, Sanjeev is right. You need to have an end state. So I explained to him that I'm comfortable this way. And this is how, if people don't bother me by asking me this question of what's your end state, what's your end state, what's your end state, I'm very comfortable the way I am. I'm here, my family is there, I travel, they travel, we meet enough, we are very connected, we are very close. So Deep heard me for about very patiently, very nicely for about 45 minutes. He says, now I've understood. You're like a bob in the ocean. You're going nowhere. He says, I get it that you're very strategic on Policy Bazaar, but you basically don't care. The waves are coming, they're going. You just here and you're just here forever and you don't quite know why you are here. And I said, yes, that's true. And he says, of course, anybody would have difficulty understanding somebody who behaves like a bob in the ocean, that who doesn't know why they are here. They're just moving up and down with the waves and they are here forever. And that got me thinking that, yes, what he's saying is true. But to me, that signified patience. I was comfortable with that idea of not having an end state. None of us have our end state in mind. Eventually, we are all dead. So to think about what life holds tomorrow, day after, etc., a lot of it is anxiety, lack of patience. And I realized I perhaps did not have a huge amount of that lack of patience or anxiety of what will happen or where will this end up. And I think that is what patience. And then when I looked back, so I wasn't good at any particular sport, but I became good at long distance running. Again, that was patience. I was good at long distance swimming. A lot of people think it was stamina, but it was actually patience. Not getting hassled about. They say in a marathon, you don't need to think about the 42 kilometers, you need to think about the next 2 kilometers only. So patience is also the ability to zone in into today and not worry that much about what the future holds. All of this is patience. And so I realized that this was my strong suit, that patience was something I was really good at.
Yeah, interesting. There's a phrase that I read about or in experience all the time, the tyranny of the clock. That we subject ourselves to this deadline, this short-term thing, what will happen tomorrow? If I do this, what will come out of it? And we're locked into that time frame. And you're not locked into that time frame. Then do you see how do you respond to other people that are logged into this time frame and you're not?
No, so I went to Sanjeev after that and I explained this whole thing to Sanjeev. In fact, it was a very serious conversation. Sanjeev had called Hitesh, Ambrish, his entire team there. And he asked me, "You got to answer me, what is this end state?" He was getting very uncomfortable with it. And it was troubling me enough that I almost started crying in that situation. So then I told Sanjeev that, "Can you stop asking me this question?" I said, "It's like I'm running and you're asking me, when do you want to stop? If you ask me, I have to say something. I have to say 10 minutes, 5 minutes. But if you don't ask me, I may never stop. Why are you asking me this question?" And that's when it sank into Hitesh first. And Hitesh asked Sanjeev that, "Listen, why are you bothering him? Has he ever come and told you that I want to understand my end state?" He hasn't. You are trying to understand his end state and thus trying to put a timeline on his commitment in what he's doing today. He's never come to you and he's asking you not to ask him that question. But I could also understand from Sanjeev's perspective. He had just invested 20 crore rupees and here was this person who did not know what their end state was. They were just doing what they were doing because many VCs insist that your family must move before they invest, etc., etc. So I hadn't stabilized myself, but I was happy to be alive in that instability forever. And I think that part wasn't sitting well with Sanjeev till that conversation. But at that conversation, it finally sank in. He's never asked me that question again. And he's been very comfortable. It's been 15 years, they've been investors. They still keep investing. I think it did sort out our interpersonal thing. And it finally sank into him as a person whom he was dealing with.
What about as someone who runs a company? Are you how do you relate to your colleagues and your patience? Does that make you a better boss or a different kind of boss?
I don't know. Sometimes to others who are not as patient as me, I come across as somebody who's way too patient. So they say, "Look," so I'll give you an example, right? There was one person who finally left us after about 7 years of being with us. They joined another organization and there they left after 3 or 6 months. So I met the founder of that organization at some point. We were just in a taxi and we were discussing that individual. And he said, "What took you so long?" And I said, "I never even asked the person to leave. They left on their own." So we almost never ask anybody to leave. And I think that comes from, I'll give you another example of what that means. Suppose I meet a colleague who does not fit one of my thought processes, right? And they are working with me. I make it my job to accommodate their and I'm talking about very fundamental thought processes. Let's assume they're a little more selfish, they're a little more characteristics that do not fit with the organization very well. They may have a huge amount of not invented here, etc., etc. I realize people don't change so easily. So while I'll keep giving feedback, I believe my job is not to make everybody come into the Policy Bazaar way. But my job is to make Policy Bazaar way the most fungible so that it can fit with everybody. So be the glue, be the so that, and I think that itself is so. Let's say I have 6 people who work with me. For those 6 people, it would be very perplexing why I am accommodating the other five. But probably what's not perplexing for them is why I'm accommodating their trait, because they are usually not able to see their own trait. Um, and I think that is something I've realized over time, that you have to mold yourself to be able to work with people. And that takes a lot of patience again. And that also from their side, it sometimes takes a lot of patience, because I'm sure there are parts of me they are molding too. But without that molding and without that accommodative nature from both sides, things will not work long term. If everybody just wanted to do only their own thing and be very stubborn about it.
Yeah. I'll move to another topic, risk. You're in the insurance business, obviously, you're in the risk business. But starting in 2008, a business that sells insurance policies online seems doubly risky. India, in India, online is not a business proposition to begin with in India in 2008. And then selling insurance to Indians is also fraught with danger. So, what is your perspective on risk? How is it that you've taken all this risk? And did you see it as a large risk at the time?
So I'm a very, I was another classmate of ours, Bhupi, I was with him. Conversations that make you realize things. And he was talking about practicality on some issue. And I realized that I'm actually a fairly practical person. I am by nature risk averse. Why would I want to take risk if it did not give me anything extra? Obviously, I'm hugely risk averse. In fact, Alok, my founder, my co-founder, will tell you I'm probably the most risk averse person he's ever met. But when you know something is very required and you've understood some of the nuts and bolts of how to get it done, and then the only thing between you and that objective is the ability to put energy behind it and put a team behind it, and both team and energy are your strength, not weakness, and you're very confident of it, then doing it just because it's going to cause you financial turmoil for a period of 5 years, 6 years, maybe longer, but the reward you receive at the end of it, which is having solved that huge issue, but also from a financial perspective, also from a freedom perspective, could be very much, then it's not a high risk, it's a low risk decision. Because the higher risk is not doing it. Because if you do not do it, you will stay in your job where you're not in the driving seat, where sometimes you don't even know where the organization is going, but you are part of the organization, where you don't trust the vision of the organization as much as you trust your own vision. I think once all those things in your mind are clear and your mind is decluttered from any fear, etc., there does come a time when the bigger risk is not doing something rather than doing something. Bhupi, again, the same guy, very affectionately calls it golden handcuffs. Sometimes people get stuck to golden handcuffs. It's okay, gold is not bad. But as long as you know that is sustainable, and as long as you know that will grow more than your own vision and is less risky than your own vision. Many of the organizations I worked for do not exist, but my organization does. And today, my organization is much bigger than many of the organizations I worked at. So I think that's what you have to see. And I think the risk is sometimes in not doing things rather than doing them.
In terms of going back to, you're selling and building a market in a country that may not be ready for it. You're working with large and somewhat nationalized insurance companies. You're dealing with policies and so on. Did that frustrate you? Were there times you decided, you thought maybe this isn't all worth it?
Oh, I don't get frustrated or phased very easily. It's a long journey. It's not going to solve in a day. I think the biggest frustration has always been consumers because they take so long to understand what is right for them. And that's where a bulk of the effort goes. I'll give you an example, right? InfoEdge invested with us, and about 10, 12 years into the company, on a Sunday morning, I get a call from somebody senior at InfoEdge saying, "Can you have somebody reach out to me for term insurance right away?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So somebody started reaching out to them. And about 5 o'clock or so in the evening, that person got in touch with me, the person who was supposed to call them, and said, "Look, I've been calling all day. They haven't been picking up the phone." So I texted them that, "Hey, what happened? Why didn't you respond? I thought you were in a hurry." And the message came back, "Really sorry. I will speak with them now. I was at a funeral." Now, it takes somebody going to a funeral after 10 years of knowing Policy Bazaar exists to realize they need to buy life insurance. And I am pretty confident if I went back, that funeral would be of a young person. Now, that's the reality of the consumers, right? And that's the reason why today we don't have competition. Because this is not like selling ice creams or jeans or shoes or any desirable product of any sort. This is a product where your best case is you never interact with it. And in most cases, you will use this product only if a very bad situation happened. So I think it's a difficult concept sale, it's a difficult concept conviction, and to some extent, unless the customers decided on their own to purchase it, it's almost impossible to sell. So I guess putting all those things together, uh, it is, but it's not like I did not know this before I started the company. I knew this, right? That this would be the case. And and I knew we would have the energy to overcome that, because at the heart of it, Gaurav, what I knew is that it's a very fair conversation. That what if a middle class person dies or they fall sick? Do they have the ability to handle the impact of it? And people are impractical. I'll give you a very simple example of how the whole situation is quite impractical. People buy a health insurance policy in India. Sorry, I'm going into a bit of detail, but this is very important. And they say,
Sure.
"I would like a coverage of 3 lakh rupees or 5 lakh rupees, or I have a group health policy which will cover me," right? Now, what people don't realize is that, have you ever seen a person who has got a serious chronic disease being genuinely supported by their company for the next 10 years? It's very rare. What I have seen is, in 80% of the cases, the company and the individual separate from each other within a period of between 6 months to 18 months. And thus, you're on your own. When you're on your own, your corporate policy is gone. At that stage, nobody will renew your health policy. So I don't think people are practical. People don't think it through. And that is what causes all the pain. The second thing is, people say, "I want a cover of 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs. What will happen if you have a 25 lakh rupees spent? Are you saying that you are the rich person? The insurance company is the poor one. The insurance company should only cover the first 3 lakhs. And after that, you want to cover everything?" Stupid thought. What a person must do is say, what is he good for? Okay, for the first 1 lakh rupees, I will take the spend. After that, dear insurance company, you handle everything. Right? But the whole country is working on this basis. And the cost of that whole rest of the stuff is actually quite low. See, insurance is for high severity, low incidence risks, but customers tend to buy it for high frequency, low severity risks because that is where they can
Yeah.
see instant gratification. So we are actually working against instant gratification. It's a very hard thing to do. And it is not like I see, the only thing is I knew when I was getting into it that this would be the case. It wasn't a fresh discovery or a shock to me. And I knew what was required. I also knew this is exactly the reason why no competitor would ever do it.
Hmm.
Because so we are not just unique, Gaurav, in India. Policy Bazaar is the largest such entity in the world. And it is because of this reason, because people do not do the hard thing. That's all.
Interesting. Let's talk about decluttering your mind. How frequently do you actually make large decisions through your run or through your exercising routine and so on?
See, decisions sometimes are stuck because you don't have clarity on the whole situation. And what running, or in my case, running is the meditation or early mornings do to you, is give you that space to start to think more, I would say almost creatively. And you start to see paradigms which you hadn't seen when you were in the middle of the day. And that helps you, it informs your decision better, right? But what also happens over time, and I think we've all seen this, Gaurav, is over time your pattern recognition starts to improve because of experience. And like I'm with Sarabir now, right? And Sarabir was with me at IIT Delhi also. He says you're a totally different person now than you were at IIT. He says your pattern recognition, your people recognition, your situation recognition is at a very advanced level compared to where you were then. And he says something has dramatically changed. And he says, I haven't seen that change in a lot of people because a lot of people somewhat stay similar. Now, there are two possibilities. Either he did not understand me very well at IIT, or this is the first time we are really working together, or maybe something has actually changed. And if that change has happened, that's happened primarily because of those long hours of running, and because that is where evolution happens. I'll give you one other very simple example. Like I did go to IIT and IIM, but I wouldn't say I was the smartest of kids. I was okay. I would say better than average, but I wasn't the topper or anything of that sort. My son's also going to a pretty good university, and sometimes he brings his problems to me. And the way I can solve those is far better than I could solve at IIT. And so something has changed in those whatever mental neurons or whatever you want to call them. And the clarity is just much higher. And many times I joke that we had this guy, Alok Mittal, who was a topper in our class. And I say, I think my kids also joke. They say that sometimes we get the feeling you're starting to be like Alok. And I think that happens because I think that's happened because of the running. Because it's like meditation, yeah. When you're meditating, I think the neurons are getting sorted. So maybe it just took me a much longer time. That's all.
It's interesting. For those online, if you have questions, you can start posting them in the chat and I will pick them up as we go along. Yashish, I also wanted to ask you this question. We did a similar conversation 2 years ago, and you were just going IPO or had, and I noticed that you have a strong sense of duty and obligation because when I congratulated you on the IPO, your first response was not that, thank you, I'm rich now, but that the people involved in the team, you're really proud of the fact that they have made significant wealth. And You told me about a guy who, in his state, is now the richest man in from that state. So, were you always like that at school, or this is something that you've developed into?
See, I think there are people who are able to think about themselves. There are people who are able to think about the other person also. I have realized this because in our close relationships, like me, my sister, my brother in law, I realize me and my brother in law are people who think about the other side quite a bit. And we have very frank conversations. And my sister clearly says she's not able to. She would just be able to think for herself and not be able to. And it's just a honest, straightforward. It's not a good or a bad. It's just that's a trait. Yes, so it is a trait that I am able to see why are other people here, and I'm extremely proud of one fact. See, as a founder, you get to decide how much equity you will have and how much equity your other colleagues will have. I have about one third of the equity of my management. And I'm very proud of that because see, I hate it when founders have 85, 90% of the equity and only 10, 15% is with the rest of the team. You are clearly saying that the team does not matter. And the words, you're managing it through social manipulation by essentially telling them you guys are great team, but actually not sharing with them. Right? Because it's eventually your decision. We get it. The founder decides. Right. So I feel very proud of that fact that we have very widespread distribution and people who stay in the organization long enough 5 7 years and longer, which is what comes down to patience, are clearly able to see that look, this guy is putting us at least equal to him, if not ahead of him. And what that means is we should also put him, the organization, at an equal footing to ourselves, and so that collective thing builds up. I did not do it because I wanted the collective thing to build up or anything. It was just that's not naturally who I am. I will not do something which I don't think is fair to you. There may be times when I may not have realized it, that I'm doing something wrong. But at a fundamental level, once I realize it, I will always do a fair deal and feel and really sleep well with it. So I feel very good about it. And I, like in my previous organization, eBookers, the founder had 99.9% of the equity and the rest of the management had 0.1. It's okay. Nobody really cares. Nobody really bothers. Some of us did not even realize, and it's fine. It is what it was. But I think I like my thought process there, and I think it builds a great, diverse value holding.
Yeah, interesting. There's a question: how do you handle criticism?
Sometimes badly, and then I think about it. Sometimes quite well. So it totally depends. So when criticism comes, at times you don't recognize it. At times you need to think about it. At times you believe it is a misunderstanding. So the person who's criticizing may not have fully understood you. I'll give you a simple example. We were going for a swim as a family and I was really rushing everybody. I said, look, guys, let's move, let's move. And so people said, what's the hurry? And you're always in a hurry or something of that sort. And I said, look, I explained to them the schedule of the day. And they said, you've just packed too much in. So I said, otherwise I won't be able to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It just won't happen if I don't go now. There are times when I'm criticized for being honest to a point. I'll give you a very simple example. If I'm talking to a PR company, to a journalist, and I say things which I wasn't supposed to say, I will be criticized for that. But that I feel good about because I do like to be honest to a fault. But then I will get criticism that, look, when you start speaking to investors, in the beginning of the call, you are saying something. By the end of the call, you're saying something else, right? That I do not take well because it's not true. Because what's happening is the other person is not understanding what I'm saying. Because to me, Gaurav, that also signifies lack of truthfulness, right? Or lack of honesty. And that's not true. So it depends. Do I agree with the criticism? Do I not agree with the criticism? And sometimes it takes you time to absorb the criticism and maybe just realize 5 days later that yes, the person was right. I was making a mistake here. But usually I don't react well to value based criticisms if I don't agree with them, because I usually don't agree with them. So I fundamentally don't think I'm a bad person. So if somebody accuses me of dishonesty or miscommunication or trying to fool people, I take that very badly because that's not who I am. And I put in a lot of effort to try and convince the other person that that's not the case. If it's a factual criticism, then that's okay. And sometimes I realize that even in those value based criticism, they may have been right. But it takes me time. My first reaction is almost always negative in those situations because I preserve those values quite strongly for myself.
Have you ever felt a fear of failure through your life?
I You always feel fear, but not. I don't know how to define failure here. So I remember once. See, we all come from middle class backgrounds. We've all seen tough days. Some have seen tougher days than others. I went to hostel as an 8-year-old. So in the end, I believe we'll manage. It's okay. Mess will happen in the world, and we will figure out a way. So there is always fear, but over time, there's also a confidence that we will manage. Maybe the fear used to be larger when you are younger. And I remember when I was a child, I used to be very afraid of the concept of death. That, I would wake up thinking, oh, today my mother's not there, my father's not there, I'm not there. What is this? Why is this? Etc. And I was very young. And at some point, you become comfortable with that thought that, nee, this is going to happen to everyone. It's going to happen to me also, it's going to happen to my children also, it's going to happen to my parents also. It's just a journey, right? So at some point, you become comfortable. So I think it's about fears are there till you become comfortable with those fears. So at some point, you either accept a situation or you have the ability to do something about the situation. And I think increasingly as life progresses, I'm headed in that direction. That you are either accepting things because they're just facts, or you're saying, "Look, we'll figure it out." I always have this conversation with my dad, and I say, once you know how to swim, you don't need to know the depth of the water because it's not like 6,000 feet is going to drown you. It's just if you had to drown, you drown in 8 feet also. So to some extent, I can tend to be a bit unplanned, a bit unorganized, but there is a chaotic form of thinking, which actually there is an organization going on at the background. It's just a little less streamlined than other people would like it to be.
For a lot of people that are starting their entrepreneurial journeys, it seems like they're the payoff is what they have in mind. Payoff might be selling the company or going IPO, but you've gone IPO. What next?
Yeah. See, when we went IPO, I felt very bad in the 6 months after, uh, because there was a lot of value-based criticism, right? These people have fooled the city. Because look, we went IPO in November 2021, and that was a time of exuberance all over the world from a financial perspective, especially for tech stocks. And we lost 60% of our value in the first 9 months. It wasn't the value loss that bothered me, because I knew we would get it back. And we are clearly on our way back, right? So now we're probably about 20% off IPO price now. And I'm sure we will overtake it very soon. So that wasn't what bothered me, because I knew we were a solid organization. But what bothered me was the same thing, right? The criticism that came with it. The criticism was almost like we knew it and we were pulling some kind of a con. We were pulling wool over people's eyes or anything of that sort. And that really hurt me. So I have spent the first 1.5 years explaining to people that is not the case, and maybe overdoing that explanation, right? That is not the case. This is a stable, strong organization which is being valued for what it is going to become 4 5 years. It's dynamic versus static metrics and all that stuff. I've finally been able to come back to who I actually am, which is a person who does not live in fears but lives in hope instead. And I'm very glad now, because that phase is over. And now I can again start to put the dreams in place. And to me, that change has just happened in the last 1 month or so. So it's a very good time that we are speaking, because I have just moved out of that zone of reacting to that criticism, explaining, and in a way keeping the organization somewhat away from its true aspirations and its true goals. And myself being, I would say, almost underactive, because there are times when you just need to explain to people who you are, and you have to do that. I always do, as I was saying, when you ask a criticism question, when I'm criticizing something I don't believe, I will always try to explain. And so I've just spent the last 1.5 years doing that. And to me, yes, that's a huge use of time, but that's also a huge waste of time, because I could have done something else in that time. But now the time has come for me to start doing those other things. And I think it'll be very interesting.
What keeps you going all these years?
It's what would you do if you weren't doing this?
I'm sure you've seen
And
people that give up, live off the land, fat, rich, and happy, or whatever. But I remember last time you told me that money makes the worst people. So what would you do? Yeah, how do you keep
that's
going?
the other thing, right? See, as I said, money brings out what you really are. And I'm just a sincere, hardworking person who likes to work on interesting things. That's what I want to do. I want to be busy. Um, but busy at my own terms, not forced busy. I don't want to not work. I want to work, and I want to do very interesting things. But now I think money has its advantages. There's no doubt about it. But beyond a level, not too much. Mostly negative beyond a level.
Interesting. Now, I also noticed that you like taking challenges. I remember you were doing the handstand challenge sometime earlier. Of course, the push-ups, of course,
Yes.
famously before that. So, what's your latest obsession? What are you obsessed about right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a certain timing in a marathon at this point, and I've got a hamstring injury, so I've spent the last 3 weeks not running and thus swimming a little more, and it's from a physical challenge perspective, that is what it is. It's just improving the running timing a little more and improving the overall triathlon performance in this year. I'm also trying to start doing weights. So I'll tell you what it is actually, without kind of mucking about. You've seen the movie Pathan, right?
I'm not, but go ahead.
Okay, Shah Rukh Khan has a certain physique in that movie. I want to get that physique, yeah. That's it.
It's CGI. It's CGI. That's the.
It's okay, I'll do it without CGI.
Yeah. Yep. To finish up, I just remembered you did a triathlon relay with your son, and you guys came first the first time you ran it, right?
Yeah, I've done one with my son and one with my daughter, and both times we got first position.
That's impressive.
Yeah, but they are good athletes. Yeah, they're good athletes. So they are as good or better than me at all three sports. That was expected. Now, the interesting thing there was my son actually had a what you would call a phobia of the sea, and that comes from having seen Titanic as a child. Because when in Titanic, when the ship goes down, the propeller is turning, and he was very afraid that some of the passengers would get hit by the propeller, and so that has become like a permanent phobia. He gets dreams about it, etc., etc. So he once disappointed a relay team by not being able to finish his leg appropriately. So for him, it was a very big thing to do the swim leg, and for me, it was a very big thing that he does the swim leg, because that made him overcome his fear. And yeah, for my daughter, it was much easier because she didn't have that fear. She would have anyways done okay. But yeah, it's important to get over those fears, right? Because otherwise they will live with you for life. And in his case, it was very disappointing because some of his relay partners had traveled all the way from India, and they had to get disqualified because of him. So he was quite, yeah, he was a young child that time. And his sister did not have any problem. She did very well. But he his phobia was so strong that eventually it became impossible for him to do that activity, and because of which his entire team got disqualified. This was a sort of corrective thing for them. I wasn't there with him that day. I was supposed to be there on that relay with him, but I had to go to the US to meet with some then investors, and thus I could not be with him. Otherwise, I know he would not have disqualified because, um, see, that's another very important thing. You have to own everything. Because he's my child, I would have been able to give him the right instruction at that stage, which was not to give up. He gave up about 22 minutes before the finish. But the other people were not his parent, so they were very worried for him. So they thought he would get hypothermia or this or that. So they told him it's okay, just come back. And I think it takes, I think that's the difference, in my opinion, between founders and managers. Because a founder, it's his baby, so he can even push it a little more, because he says, okay, if it actually flops, so what? It is mine. I think that's how a parent is. They can push their own kid a little more. So if it was somebody else's kid, I wouldn't be able to push as much, perhaps. But yeah.
Congrats on both those victories. And Yashish, thanks for taking time out. I really appreciate that you took this time to talk to us. And as always, I love conversations with you. So I really enjoyed this one as well. Yashish, thank you very much. And The rest of you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I always learn from these here. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks a lot.